Hey, Jason,
Yes, Gary?
we were talking a while ago about counting our blessings.
Yes?
And Scott and Michelle's son had his wisdom teeth out this week. Did you have yours out this week?
I lost my wisdom teeth a long time ago.
Yeah, I did too. I think I lost my wisdom along with them.
Yeah, I think it leaked out slowly over a long period of time.
Jim's grandson had his appendix taken out.
I've still got mine.
I think they took mine out when they did some other stuff.
Really?
Sometimes when they open you up, they just take whatever they can.
They just take that just for
Take
fun.
it out, yeah.
So they can charge you more line. It's
Yeah,
probably a line item on the
It's
bill.
a line item, yeah.
Yeah, so.
And our grandson Josiah's girlfriend was sledding at OC. Today she had surgery. She broke her, I think she broke her tibia, she broke her fibula in 5 places, tore 2 ligaments, and her ankle's all out of place.
Mercy.
So,
That was
Oh, I
what
don't-
did she hit?
I don't know how you do that.
There's not
There's
I
not
didn't
much.
think there were that many big hills in Oklahoma.
I didn't think there was that big hill there in,
Not at OC.
in Edmond
Yeah.
to do that, but
They must have gone to the Arbuckles.
they may have taken a little side trip.
Um,
We did see some neat redneck things on on YouTube.
oh boy.
People that were pulling at a pickup, they're going down the street, pulling a boat, pulling somebody on skis. They were skiing down the street. There was icy, snow and ice, and so they just took the boat to the back of the pickup and hooked skis on that.
Why did you need the boat? Couldn't you just hook the skis to the back of the pickup?
I-
It's probably illegal to pull
It's
skis
illegal
with
to pull
a
skis with a pickup,
So
so
you hook the skis to the boat, then you're not illegal. Okay. That's
Then there was another one of
genius,
somebody
what that
in a buggy, it looked like an Amish buggy, and someone was over skiing, holding on to a rope, like snow skiing, and they have to go around the telephone poles as they hit.
I'm wondering how the rope goes around the telephone poles.
No,
but-
they avoid the telephone poles. They have to come.
Oh, okay, they
this way.
slalom.
They have to
Okay.
kind of come like
All
this.
right.
So
Okay.
there you go.
That's
We're out of time.
that's I suppose that's why insurance was invented. Well, you know, my son James had a little happening.
Oh, that's
had a little
right.
happening as well. But
Yeah, he had trouble emptying the
he
trash.
took the trash out at his new job. Yeah, when the snows were down there, and he fell and he hurt his knee a couple years ago when he was in the AIM program, and he dislocated his knee, and they had to go to the hospital to get it. Well, this time his knee dislocated and it popped back in, but somehow when it popped back in, there was a bone chip or a fracture of some kind. So I don't know. You're supposed to go to the doctor again. I hadn't heard how that went. So
Did you give him the name of that surgeon that I gave you that did that surgery today?
I don't think so.
Okay,
I think I haven't talked to him since.
oh, okay.
So
He's a good one.
well, I'll give him that name.
Yeah.
But yeah, so James is in pain, which means his roommates are in pain.
Yeah, we remember all those people in our prayers as they recover from the various surgeries and accidents and incidents and all those things.
Yeah.
What book are we in now?
Well, we're still in Acts. We're getting close to not being in Acts anymore.
And I'm not eager to get through with Acts, but I'm excited about getting into the book of Romans.
Romans is a good book. Yeah.
It's
so
it's one of the
it's
27
one
best.
of one of my 27 favorite New Testament books.
Yeah, I'm right with you there.
Yeah.
And we're going to shoot for 3 chapters tonight. We'll probably fail miserably.
We will. Well, okay. We'll fail partially.
Okay, we'll
All right.
partially fail. We better start with chapter 24.
So we better start with chapter 24. Yeah, so that'd be a good place to start. So 24 verses 1 through 9. After 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders with a certain attorney named Tertullus, and they brought charges to the governor against Paul. After Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying to the governor, "Since we have through you attained much peace, and since by your providence reforms are being carried out for this nation, we acknowledge this in every way and everywhere, most excellent Felix, with all thankfulness. But that I may not weary you any further, I beg you to grant us, by your kindness, a brief hearing. For we have found this man a real pest, and a fellow who stirs up dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. And he even tried to desecrate the temple, and then we arrested him. And we wanted to judge him according to our own law, but Lysias, the commander, came along and with much violence took him out of our hands, ordering his accusers to come before you. And by examining him yourself concerning all these matters, you will be able to ascertain the things of which we accuse him." The Jews also joined in the attack, asserting that these things were so. So a real quick recap before we jump into this, because it was 2 weeks ago that we were here since we had snow day last week. So Paul was arrested in Jerusalem, and there was a plot against him to try and kill him. So the plot became found out. So the Lysias, the commander, the chiliarch, sent him to Caesarea and sent a letter along with him explaining what had happened. So Felix now has invited. This is about a week later. It's like 7 days later, isn't it? A week later that they have invited up the accusers, the Jewish accusers. And I wonder if any of them have had any food yet.
That 40,
The 40
that bound
of them
themselves
that-
with an oath, they're getting hungry
They're getting hungry by now. So
after a couple of years.
it's 5 days later, right there. It said so. 5 days later, they have made the trip up to Caesarea to bring charges against Paul. So that's where we're at. So Paul was taken to Caesarea to keep him safe because he's a Roman citizen, and the Romans are going to protect their own. He has rights that other prisoners would not have because he is a Roman citizen. So he is taken there to keep him safe. 5 days later, the high priest and some of the elders and a lawyer named Tertullus come down, and they are there to present their case against Paul. And Tertullus begins with some effusive praise towards Felix. Now, Felix is not a good guy. Felix is a scoundrel. In fact, Josephus records that Felix, just a year or two prior to this, there was a high priest by the name of Jonathan. And Felix didn't like Jonathan because Jonathan was critical of Felix. So Felix hired assassins and had Jonathan assassinated. So Felix has assassinated the high priest of the Jews. And here, Ananias, now the high priest, stands before him with Tertullus, a lawyer, standing before him, praising Felix and telling him what a great guy he is. And that by your reforms we have attained much peace. So
He was really buttering him
this
up.
is we know what happened to the last guy that was critical of Felix. So we're not going to stand here and say, Felix, you're a scoundrel. Now give us what we want, because Felix might just kill them all. So then he accuses Paul, and look at the things that he accuses him of. He says he's a pest.
That's terrible. That's awful.
He bothers us. He says things that make us look bad. He stirs up dissension, which was not true. Paul was not stirring up dissension. None of the places that Paul went was the dissension stirred up because Paul was out agitating people. He is a ringleader of the Nazarenes. Well, that might be somewhat accurate, but he uses the word Nazarene there as a derogatory term. He doesn't dare use the word Christian, doesn't dare use the word disciples of Christ or anything like that. He's using Nazarene as a derogatory term. And it says he tried to desecrate the temple, which just is a fabrication. It didn't happen. Not to mention the fact that Felix is the one who has desecrated the temple by killing the high priest, by assassinating the high priest, which took place at the temple compound. So if anybody in that place has desecrated the temple, it's Felix himself. Then Tertullus accuses Lysias of violence. He was the Roman chiliarch that came in and rescued Paul from their hands, and says, it's your guy that was stirring up trouble. It wasn't us creating a riot. It was your guy that came in and took it. We were following, we were within our legal rights to pronounce judgment against this man and to put him to death. And Lysias is the one that came in and stirred up trouble. And so then the remaining Jews agree with the testimony. They're giving their assent to what Tertullus is saying and say, yep, he's got it all right. That's the way things happen. So interesting interesting spin, I guess. That's a common vernacular way of saying things, that you put a lot of spin on it, trying to make them look like they're in the right.
It's definitely a spin.
So then verses 10 through 21, now Paul gets his chance at a rebuttal. So it says, when the governor had nodded for him to speak, Paul responded, knowing that for many years you have been a judge to this nation, I cheerfully make my defense, since you can take note of the fact that no more than 12 days ago I went up to Jerusalem to worship. And neither in the temple nor in the synagogues nor in the city itself did they find me carrying on a discussion with anyone or causing a riot. Nor can they prove to you the charges of which they now accuse me. But this I admit to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, I do serve the God of our fathers, believing everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets, having a hope in God that these men cherish themselves, that there shall certainly be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. In view of this, I also do my best to maintain always a blameless conscience both before God and before men. Now after several years I came to bring alms to my nation, and to present offerings, in which they found me occupied in the temple, having been purified without any crowd or uproar. But there were certain Jews from Asia who ought to have been present before you to make accusation, if they should have anything against me. Or else let these men themselves tell what misdeed they found when I stood before the council, other than for this one statement which I shouted out while standing among them. For the resurrection of the dead, I'm on trial before you today. So Paul gives his defense, and he acknowledges Felix's authority over him without pandering. He acknowledges that Felix is in charge, but he doesn't pander to Felix the way that Tertullus did by telling him, he's a
What a
great
wonderful,
leader.
what a wonderful guy he
He's
is.
a great guy. So, but he does acknowledge Felix's authority. And now Paul only arrived in Jerusalem 12 days ago. So he's been in Caesarea for 5 days. And so he was in Jerusalem a grand total of 1 week. And during that week, he supposedly incited riots that have led this trial being necessary. And Paul's, use your common sense. In 7 days, nobody can stir up that much trouble. Nobody could have caused that difficulty. He wasn't involved in any controversy or public displays. He wasn't leading a public life the way that he did sometimes when he went into new territories, where he went to the synagogue and he sought out groups of people that he could address. He didn't do that in Jerusalem. He was keeping to himself. He was keeping quiet and private, keeping himself only to the midst of their fellowship. He wasn't going out and evangelizing. And then he said, according to the way, I serve the God of our fathers. So he recharacterizes that statement they made about him being a leader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Well, if this is what they mean, that I live according to the way that follows Christ, then that is true. And through that, he says, I serve the same God that they serve. The God that they claim to serve is the God that I am serving. And then he goes on to say, I haven't been in Jerusalem for several years. It's been a period of several years. So they're saying that after several years of absence, that now I'm able to come into Jerusalem and in a period of 1 week stir up this much trouble. It just doesn't make sense. They found him in the temple without a crowd. There was no uproar of people around him when he was pulled out of the temple. He wasn't in the midst of a controversy or a difficult setting. He was there quietly minding his own business, attending to his the repayment and the completion of the vows that had been taken. And they came and found him, and they started the trouble. And then he says, certain Jews from Asia, and these are the same ones that found him in Thessalonica. They followed him around from city to city. They were constantly following him around, causing problems. And he said, if these are the ones that are saying that I did something wrong, where are they? Why aren't they here to accuse me? If they're the ones that have fault with me, then they should be here to speak their case, but they're not here. And so when it comes to these men who are here presenting the case, what misdeed did they witness? Mm-hmm. They weren't even there. And they're just here recounting a story that certain Jews from Asia told them, and they didn't even bother to show up to speak their case. Paul does admit to a shouted statement in their midst, but he's not admitting to wrongdoing or saying that, I was trying to stir him up by that. But, as far as any participation of a loud nature or of anything that he did that could be considered boisterous, mm-hmm. that meeting had already devolved into near riot status when he, at that point, made the statement that he made. And it was not, it did not contribute to the riot. It was already in place.
Now, they started by hitting him in the first place.
Yeah. So Paul has given a very succinct and very, very factual defense, very, he's pled his case.
It'll go there.
It will, there it goes.
Oops.
Oh, now
See,
you've gone too
that
far.
went too far. There we go.
Okay, 22 to 27. But Felix, having a more exact knowledge about the way, put them off, saying, when Lysias the commander comes down, I will decide your case. And he gave orders to the centurion for him to be kept in custody and yet have some freedom, and not to prevent any of his friends from ministering to him. But some days later, Felix arrived with Drusilla, his wife, who was a Jewess, and sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ. And as he was discussing righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix became frightened and said, go away for the present. When I find time, I will summon you. At the same time, too, he was hoping that money would be given him by Paul. Therefore, he always used to send for him quite often and converse with him. But after 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and wishing to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul imprisoned. So Felix knew more about the way than the Jewish leaders presumed. So when they bring up this idea that Paul is a leader of this sect of the Nazarenes, and then Paul sort of reveals his involvement with that group. Felix knew more than the Jewish leaders gave him credit for about this. And so it doesn't mean he was a believer. Certainly it doesn't mean he was that he was partial to that sect. It just means he knew about it. And so he's not buying he's not buying what they're saying about Paul being a rabble rouser and those kind of things, because he understands the hatred that the Jews have for Christians. And so he understands that they have a bias already against Paul if he is a member of the way. So it says when Lysias comes down. So he knows that when Lysias sent Paul, he sent a letter. But when it says when Lysias came down, that's an indefinite thing. That doesn't mean I know that Lysias is scheduled to be here a week from Tuesday and we'll get to the bottom of it then. He just is kind of like, well, next time I see Lysias, we'll hammer this out and we'll figure out what's going on. He's not in any hurry. He's not putting a timeline or a date of completion on this. He's just saying, well, I don't know what to do about it at this moment, so I don't want the Jews mad at me any madder than they already are after I killed the high priest. And Paul's a Roman citizen, so I have to be careful how I deal with him. So I'm just going to kind of hedge my bets and give him some freedoms, but not sentence him to death.
Not let him go,
Yeah, not let him go. So Paul remains in prison, but with some freedoms. Felix visits Paul soon thereafter with his wife Drusilla, who was a daughter of Herod Agrippa I, which I think you're going to educate us on here in just a minute. And their son is Marcus Antonius Agrippa. And that name means nothing to you, except that it's one of the few names that is known for certain to have died in the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in Pompeii in AD 70 or 71, whatever that was. Drusilla and Marcus Antonius Agrippa were there in Pompeii, and they died in that eruption. And so just kind of a point of historical interest that there's that connection to the Bible.
And Pliny the Elder was there too.
Pliny the Elder was there.
And he was trying to help some people escape and didn't make it. He didn't succeed.
And we know that because Pliny the Younger told us?
Maybe.
Maybe, okay.
Now, I had these slides down in the next chapter, but when I saw this, I thought maybe I'd just stick them right up here.
Bring them on up here because it fits.
What we need is somebody like the voice of the Bullpups or somebody to read off these names, because you don't know the players without the thing.
So up at the very top is Herod married Mariamne.
And that is Herod. Which Herod is that?
That's Herod that did the slaughter of the babies in the early. Yeah.
Herod the not so great.
Yeah, Herod the evil. And one of their children was, the red arrow says, Aristobulus, who married Bernice, the daughter of Costobar and Salome.
That would have been about the time of when they came back from Egypt to go to Nazareth. And then they produced a son named Herod Agrippa the First. Yeah.
And he died in AD 44. Was he the worms guy?
Yeah, that would have been the worms guy.
Yeah. He
was
no.
44. Yeah, that would be right.
Yeah.
That'd be right.
So
44.
he was the one that
the guy got eaten by worms.
the voice of a man or God, not a man, in Acts chapter. Yeah. I forget the chapter.
Around 9 or so.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Okay, we'll go to
and another child of Aristobulus was Herodias, who was married. That was a daughter who married Herod Philip and Herod Antipas, and that would have been the one that beheaded John the Baptist.
That's the John the Baptist one.
Yep.
And going back to King Agrippa the First, he had three children.
Drusilla,
who was married to
Felix, who was her second, her second husband, by the way.
Yeah.
And he also had Herod Agrippa II, who died in AD 100.
And that'll be the Agrippa that we will see in the story of Paul here.
Okay.
A little bit later. And then we have
Bernice.
And so you have Drusilla, who is the wife of Felix, the current governor. But then later we're going to see Herod Agrippa II and Bernice enter in.
Yeah.
And then they had the son. Well, I guess I didn't go past that. Had the son named Agrippa.
Okay.
So that's kind of the family tree there, and it's really mixed up.
Really mixed up, and really there's like, lots of incestuous relationships that are going on as well. So when Drusilla and Felix show up, Paul preaches to them, of course, as you would expect Paul to do. Felix understands what Paul is saying. He hears, Paul is preaching about self-righteousness and the judgment to come, And Felix has a visceral reaction to that. He understands intellectually what Paul is saying, but he does not act. He does not want to consider what he would need to do to be okay with that message. So Paul is sent away until a more convenient time. He is, we have the song in our songbooks, Almost Persuaded, because of that encounter. And really, Felix sent for Paul often because he was hoping for a bribe. Felix knew of the story of Paul bringing, a large contribution to the church in Jerusalem. And he said, well, if this guy can drum up that kind of support, maybe he can, maybe his supporters, his followers will be monetarily interested in getting him out of jail. And so maybe we could get a bribe there. Paul there remains imprisoned in Caesarea for 2 years. And eventually Felix is deposed. He is not just he doesn't just serve out his term, but eventually he makes enough of the powerful people mad that it makes its way up to Caesar, and Caesar replaces him and sends in Porcius Festus to take his place as governor of the region.
So is that like impeached?
Yes, he was recalled to Rome, and I don't remember if he was just stripped of his titles and banished, or if he was. I can't remember if he was killed. I can't remember what happened to him.
Killed, but it was not a happy thing when they recalled him.
He was. Johnny's got a thought.
Well, it's just the fact that there's a whole lot of people today that become frightened when you talk about righteousness.
Oh, absolutely.
And judgment to come.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's not. Yeah, it's not a welcome subject in a lot of places, and people want to change the subject real quick when you try to talk about it.
and he had the opportunity to do something about it and not be frightened anymore, but he was more interested in getting a bribe than taking care of that fear, and so that's. And as Johnny says, that's not an uncommon reaction today. People hear that and be frightened.
Right.
And it's sad, but that's just the way it is. Chapter 25. Now we have the arrival of Festus. Festus, therefore, having arrived in the province, 3 days later went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priests and the leading men of the Jews brought charges against Paul, and they were urging him, requesting a concession against Paul, that he might have him brought to Jerusalem, at the same time setting an ambush to kill him on the way. They're a bunch of hungry guys waiting on that road.
Been waiting 2 years.
Festus then answered that Paul was being kept in custody at Caesarea, and that he himself was about to leave shortly. Therefore he said, "Let the influential men among you go there with me, and if there is anything wrong about the man, let them prosecute him." We have Festus replacing Felix then. Not long after he arrives, he goes to Jerusalem pretty quickly. And the chief priests and leading men of the Jews start talking about Paul again. They were rabid. I mean, 2 years have gone. Usually it kind of dies down after a while. But we know that the ones that followed him around through Asia Minor and on into Greece wouldn't let go. And it carried on into Jerusalem. They're not going to leave it.
He's been taken out of circulation for 2 years now, and they're not content with that.
Yeah, they're not content with the fact that he hadn't done anything for 2 years, but they're not going to be content unless they destroy him. Maybe they saw him as such a traitor because he was a rising star in Judaism, and then he learned better and turned to the truth. And so they wanted to have Paul taken to Jerusalem, and of course they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. And Festus replied that he's in Caesarea where he needs to be, and we'll have the trial there. And again, he's a Roman citizen, and that was the seat of the Roman government, and so that was his right. We hadn't had a map, I don't think, that shows these two places. Jerusalem is down there, just west of the north end of the Dead Sea, and Caesarea is way up there. And so they wanted him to be transported from Jerusalem down to Caesarea, and somewhere along that way they'd set an ambush for him and kill him.
About what's the distance there?
Oh,
It's about
that far.
We had this map back when Peter went to Caesarea, because Peter was in Joppa, wasn't he, when he got called to Caesarea, and that was like a day's. From Joppa to Caesarea was basically a day's journey.
Be a day, maybe a little bit more.
So probably a day from Jerusalem to Joppa, and then a day from Joppa to Caesarea.
From the bottom part of the inhabited part of Judea before you get to the desert, up to around Nazareth is about 100 miles. And I think the width is about 30 or so.
Yeah.
And so that would kind of tell you the distance from Jerusalem to Caesarea. Maybe a couple of days, but when Paul was taken from Jerusalem, they did it overnight, didn't they? They had an escort.
took him with horses, yeah,
Had
by
a
horseback.
mounted escort,
Yeah.
but I think they did it overnight.
Yeah.
So, in verses 6 through 12, Paul is forced to make a decision. And after he had spent not more than 8 or 10 days among them, and this is Festus, he went down to Caesarea, and on the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. And after he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him which they could not prove. While Paul said in his own defense, I have committed no offense either against the law of the Jews or against the temple or against Caesar. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, answered Paul and said, Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me on these charges? But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you also very well know. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything worthy of death, I do not refuse to die. But if none of those things is true of which these men accuse me, no one can hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then when Festus had conferred with his council, he answered, You have appealed to Caesar you shall go. Festus goes down after about 3 days, goes to Jerusalem. That's where he needs to make himself known and get to know all these Jewish leaders. Then he goes back to Caesarea and takes a seat on the tribunal and orders Paul to be brought. And the Jews begin bringing these charges. They just make them up as they go. They can't prove any of them. And Paul said, I have done nothing wrong, and so no one can hand me over to them. He says, I'm not afraid to die. If I've committed a crime worthy of death, then I am not afraid to die. And so he says, that's not the problem. But Festus wants to make the Jews, he didn't want to start out by making the Jews mad. And so he says, Are you willing to go to Jerusalem? And Paul's reply was, No one can hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. So he talked to his council. And once a Roman citizen had appealed to Caesar, unless there was some obstacle, they had to grant that.
Yeah.
And so that's why he talked to his council. But the result was Festus said, You will go to Caesar. You appeal to Caesar, and you will go to Caesar.
Who was Caesar at this point?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Is it Nero yet?
No,
No?
I don't think it's
Okay.
Nero yet.
And
While Paul is in Rome, it will be Nero, but I'm not sure.
so this may be right at the end of Claudius? 'Cause
It might be at the end of Claudius.
At the
I
end of
don't know.
Claudius.
It's either end of Claudius or the beginning of Nero's. Neither one was a real great guy.
Claudius had expelled the Jews from Rome because of the dissension between Jewish and Roman, or Jewish and Christian, the Jews' hatred for the Christians and the things that came up as that. So Claudius was not a friend of the Christians or the Jews by any stretch.
No.
But Nero, we know, was bonkers
He was,
and was very hostile towards the Christians. So if you can imagine, I mean, either one of those guys, for Paul to appeal to Caesar rather than put his hands in the fate of the Jewish, I mean, that tells you how rabid they were in
Yeah.
wanting his death.
yeah, the choose Caesar
Because he
over them.
knew that he was safer in Caesar's hands than he was in the Jewish high priest's hands.
Right, yeah.
So that just kind of tells you the predicament that Paul is in by the fact that he appeals to Caesar.
And of course, we're aware of the hand of the Holy Spirit in this whole thing.
Sure.
And the goal is to get Paul to Rome.
Right.
And to preach the gospel in Rome. And this is going to accomplish that.
Yeah.
And he won't, apparently he doesn't have to face Caesar this time around because of the delays. And so he goes to Caesar, but he doesn't have to see Caesar, either one of those bad guys. And so Festus says, Go to Caesar. Now it's when that the Herod Agrippa, comes. Now, when several days had elapsed, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea and paid their respects to Festus. And while they were spending many days there, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, There is a certain man left a prisoner by Felix, and when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews brought charges against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation upon him. And I answered them that it is not the custom of the Romans to hand over any man before the accused meets his accusers face to face, and has an opportunity to make his defense against the charges. And so after they had assembled here, I made no delay, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal, and ordered the man to be brought. And when the accuser stood up, they began bringing charges against him, not of such crimes as I was expecting, but they simply had some points of disagreement with them about their own religion, and about a certain dead man, Jesus, whom Paul asserted to be alive. And being at a loss how to investigate such matters, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there stand trial on these matters. But when Paul appealed to be held in custody for the emperor's decision, I ordered him to be kept in custody until I send him to Caesar. And Agrippa said to Festus, I also would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you shall hear him. So Festus lays Paul's case before King Agrippa. And he said, there's a certain man, and he's not as familiar with the situation as Felix was. There was a certain man left a prisoner by Felix, and the Jews were bringing charges against him. And I told them that it's not the custom of the Romans to hand anyone over until they've met their accusers face to face. And so Festus gives Agrippa a brief overview of the trial. And to him, there was just a certain dead man whom Paul asserted to be alive. And that's all Festus saw, was there's a dead man that Paul claimed to be alive, and that's the whole problem. And he said, I didn't know how to judge this. I was at a loss. He hadn't violated any Roman laws. And so I asked if he would go to Jerusalem, and that's when he appealed to Caesar. And so Agrippa says that I would like to hear him myself, and Festus says, okay, tomorrow you'll get that chance. In verses 23 to 27, Festus introduces the case to all of the officials with Agrippa and the others. And so on the next day, when Agrippa had come together with Bernice amid great pomp, and had entered the auditorium accompanied by the commanders and the prominent men of the city, at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all you gentlemen here present with us, you behold this man about whom all the people of the Jews appealed to me, both at Jerusalem and here, loudly declaring that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death, and since he himself appealed to the emperor, I decided to send him. Yet I have nothing definite about him to write to my lord. Therefore I have brought him before you all, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after the investigation has taken place, I may have something to write. For it seems absurd to me in sending a prisoner not to indicate also the charges against him. And so Agrippa and Bernice arrive amid great pomp, and this is where I had those other slides that I took out, so that's why there's just one little line there. And the commanders and the prominent men of the city, this is a big affair. This is a big deal. Everybody shows up. Anybody who's anybody shows up. And Festus explains that the Jews appealed to me loudly, declaring that he ought not to live any longer. I found he committed nothing worthy of death. Now, this is at least the second time that he's been found not guilty. The Pharisees, when he was before the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, after he said that he was on trial for the things that they believe in, they said, we don't find any fault in him. And so Festus says the same thing. He didn't do anything worthy of death, but then he appealed to Caesar. But I'm going to have a dilemma because I can't send a prisoner to Caesar and not indicate the charges.
Right.
I don't think Caesar would be real happy if a prisoner shows up and someone says, well, what's he accused of? And the person who accompanies him said, I have no idea.
Not real sure.
Festus did it. Festus sent him. And so take it up with Festus. And Caesar's going to say, you're going to waste my time listening to a man that I don't even know what his charges are. So you can see what kind of a fix Festus is in, because Paul hadn't done anything wrong. So what's he going to send him to Rome about? He hadn't broken any Roman laws.
Right.
And so he is in a pickle.
Yeah.
And so we do get down to chapter 26.
We're going to get into chapter
This is
26. We're
awesome.
man, time is moving slow tonight.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's
Well, they're listening slowly.
We're talking fast.
We're talking fast, and they're listening slowly.
So it just goes right into chapter 26, straight from where we were. There's no break in the action. It says, and Agrippa said to Paul, you are permitted to speak for yourself. Then Paul stretched out his hand and proceeded to make his defense. In regard to all the things of which I'm accused by the Jews, I consider myself fortunate, King Agrippa, that I'm about to make my defense before you today, especially because you are an expert in all customs and questions among the Jews. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. So then, all Jews know my manner of life from my youth up, which from the beginning was spent among my own nation and at Jerusalem, since they have known about me for a long time previously, if they were willing to testify that I lived as a Pharisee according to the strictest sect of our religion. And now I am standing on trial for the hope of the promise made by God to our fathers, the promise to which our 12 tribes hope to attain as they earnestly serve God night and day. And for this hope, O king, I am being accused by the Jews. Why is it considered incredible among you people if God does raise the dead? So Paul recounts his story again. This is at least the fourth or fifth time he's given his defense. He gave a defense before the Sanhedrin. He gave a defense before Lysias. He gave a defense before Felix. He's given a defense before Festus, now before Agrippa. So this is the same defense he's given. He is eager to give this defense to Agrippa because Agrippa is well acquainted with Jewish law and customs. He's a king of the Jews. He's Jewish. He knows the religion. Whether or not he practices it faithfully or as a good Jew, is up for debate. But he at least knows the stories. He knows the background. He knows when Paul talks about the Moses and the law and the prophets and things like that, Agrippa knows what he's talking about. And so, compare that to Festus, who Festus said he thinks some dead guy's raised. I don't know what he's talking about, but he doesn't really understand what that even means. But now he's talking to somebody who understands what Paul is saying. So Paul gives background information about himself, about his own upbringing and raising, and how he is, about how he was who he became, who he is with his upbringing, and adheres to the Pharisee sect and those kind of things. And then he says, Paul makes the case here that he is on trial for the hope of the promise made by God. What is the hope that every Jewish person clung to? The hope of the coming Messiah. And Paul says that's what they have me on trial for. I believe that the Messiah has come. I believe we found him. I believe Jesus is the Messiah. They don't, and they want to put me on trial for believing that God kept his promise. God has brought us who he said he was going to bring us. They reject him, and now they want to kill me because they don't believe that God kept his promise. And so Paul gets right to the point about what the Jews are really mad about. They're not mad about causing a riot in the temple. They did that all the time when they didn't get their way. They're not mad about him preaching, taking people away from them. They were willing to do what it took to keep the power. What they're really mad about is that Paul believes that Jesus was raised from the dead, that he is the Messiah, and they don't believe that.
I have a question that really has nothing to do with anything.
Awesome.
But what does it mean when it says that Paul stretched out his hand?
Well, I think he called for their attention, and I think he also, Paul would have been shackled, and I think he's letting them see that he is, he's living out his faith. He is not willing to give in to what they're saying. So I think there's not theatrics at play there, but I think Paul is just showing them what is at stake here.
I think it's a natural motion for an orator back then to stretch out his hand like that.
Yeah.
One thing about Agrippa too, listening to this, some of the Herods, at least starting with Herod the Great, actually grew up in Rome with the Caesars.
Yeah.
Some of them, they were buddies of the Caesars as they were growing up, and so not only is Agrippa well acquainted with Jewish law and customs, he's also well acquainted with Roman culture and law and everything else. And so, Paul is not buttering him up when he says this, because Agrippa is well equipped to hear what he has to say.
Right. So then verses 9 through 18, Paul continues his defense, continues his story. He says, "So then, I thought to myself that I had to do many things hostile to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And this is just what I did in Jerusalem. Not only did I lock up many of the saints in prisons, having received authority from the chief priests, but also when they were being put to death, I cast my vote against them. And as I punished them often in all the synagogues, I tried to force them to blaspheme, and being furiously enraged at them, I kept pursuing them even in foreign cities. While thus engaged, as I was journeying to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests, at midday, O king, I saw on the way a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shining all around me and those who were journeying with me. And when we had fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew dialect, 'Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads.' And I said, 'Who art thou, Lord?' The Lord said, 'I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. But arise and stand on your feet. For this purpose I have appeared to you, to appoint you a minister and a witness, not only to the things which you have seen, but also to the things which I will appear to you, delivering you from the Jewish people and from the Gentiles to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the dominion of Satan to God, in order that they may receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance among those who have been sanctified by faith in me. So Paul tells of his early hostility towards the followers of Christ, and we know this from the early chapters of the book of Acts. And Paul is specific. He's not shying away from things that he did to persecute the church. He says, I locked them up. When the vote was cast on how to proceed with people who'd been locked up, I voted to put them to death. We know that's true. He was there at the stoning of Stephen.
And that when they left their cloaks at his feet, that doesn't mean he was just watching cloaks.
Right.
It was a symbol of his position.
Right. It was his. Yeah. He was like the honored guest at the stoning of Stephen.
Right, and that also shows that he was more than that. He was an up and coming
Yeah.
leader. That he had already obtained the right to vote.
He was there as a witness to ensure that things were done according to the law. I mean, he was like a supervisor of the execution of Stephen. He says, I punished them. I tried to force blasphemy from them, which at the time he would not have seen it as blasphemy. He would have seen it as a recanting of a blasphemous oath that they had taken to Christ. But now he sees that what he was trying to get them to do was commit blasphemy against Christ. He was enraged at them. And so I think he recognizes that he felt the way about Christians early on that they feel about him now, that the Jewish leadership feels about him now. They are enraged as he was at that time. He pursued them. He made it his life's purpose to pursue Christians. And so everything changed for Paul on the road to Damascus, and we know the story well. That it's recounted 3 times in the book of Acts, how his conversion story, and he saw the light, he heard the voice. I think it's interesting here that he specifically says that Jesus spoke to him in the Hebrew dialect, and I think that that's not just an incidental detail of the story that Paul is recounting there. I think he's saying that specifically to indicate that Jesus was Jewish, and that it is a fulfillment of all of these Jewish prophecies. It's a fulfillment of the law and prophets. It's right in line with everything that they would have expected it to be from their culture and their day. Mm-hmm. If Jesus had shown up to him in the vision speaking Greek, I think that would have been strange. But the fact that he was speaking Hebrew just indicates that this is all fits right in to all the pieces of the puzzle fit together here. And Jesus says in that interaction that he would rescue Paul both from the Jews and the Gentiles. And so we see that in this case here. The Jews are enraged at Paul. They want to kill him. But there's Gentiles now who have Paul's fate in their hands. And so Christ has promised that Paul would be safe through his interactions both with the Jews and the Gentiles.
And that had to hurt when Paul said he's going to rescue me from all of you, mm-hmm. Jews and Gentiles alike.
And in regards to the Gentiles, Paul specifically says that the Gentiles were to receive the word. And we know what happened back in Jerusalem when Paul made that case that he was going to be sent to the Gentiles. That's when they went crazy. But here in this setting, that would have not been a good thing for the Jews to do that.
No.
So Paul is able to make his case here in a much more reasoned way.
Yeah, there's a very notable difference here when he starts talking about taking the word to the Gentiles. They don't dare slap a Roman in front of a Roman.
Right. And don't start a riot in the Roman government's central palace here. Yeah. So the Gentiles would receive the word, and Paul is specific about some of those things, that they would open their eyes, they would turn from darkness to light, they would turn from Satan to God, would receive forgiveness of sins, receive an inheritance. Can you imagine how the Jewish people listening would have heard that? How the high priest would have thought that he's saying the Gentiles are going to receive an inheritance as descendants of Moses? Mm-hmm. That is. Boy, that had to get them stirred up. And that they would be sanctified, made holy. Mm-hmm. Gentiles made holy? That is revolutionary doctrine that Paul is preaching here.
Yeah, totally.
And the Jews would not have liked this, but there's nothing they can do about it. And Paul here is preaching the gospel to the people that are listening, Jews and Gentiles alike. So they would be sanctified by faith.
They're the ones that opened the door.
Yeah. And so the next section here, verses 19 to 23. Consequently, King Agrippa, I did not prove disobedient to the heavenly vision, but kept declaring both to those of Damascus first, and also at Jerusalem, and then throughout all the region of Judea, and even to the Gentiles, that they should repent and turn to God, performing deeds appropriate to repentance. For this reason, some Jews seized me in the temple and tried to put me to death. And so, having obtained help from God, I stand to this day testifying both to small and great, stating nothing but what the prophets and Moses said was going to take place, that the Christ was to suffer, and that by reason of his resurrection from the dead, he should be the first to proclaim light both to the Jewish people and to the Gentiles. Paul obeyed Christ. The vision that came to him on the Damascus road that told him what to do, Paul from that moment was obedient to that vision. And that's what he's been doing up to this day. He's done nothing but obey Christ. So he preached first in Damascus, then in Jerusalem, in Judea, and then finally to the Gentiles. I mean, he just says, this is what I've been doing. Since that calling from Christ, I've been obeying his voice. I've been preaching and doing what Christ asked me to do. And his message is to repent and live accordingly. Repent, but not just in word. Repent and then make your life match the repentance that you've done. And then he says, for this reason, the Jews accuse him, and it's the reason that he gives is that it goes back to what he said at the very beginning. He said, when he says, I'm on trial for the hope that God has kept his promise, and for the fact that Christ, Moses and the prophets predict that the Christ was to come, that he was to suffer, that he was to be raised again, and that the message would be preached to Jews and Gentiles. That's what's happening right now, and that's why I'm on trial. I'm on trial because God kept his promise.
Yeah. From the promise to Abraham, they should have understood that it was that all nations would be blessed through
Right.
him. And so it's obvious that this is the fulfillment of that.
Yeah,
God never promised Abraham through your seed the Jews are going to be blessed.
yeah. Exactly. Dave?
Just out of curiosity, how many years from the time of Paul's conversion to now?
This is close to 30 years. Paul's conversion takes place within the first couple of years after Pentecost. Certainly within the first 5, but probably quicker than that. By AD 32, 33, and this is AD 62. So this is, if it's not exactly 30 years, it's pretty close to it.
So Paul's probably, what, 50s or 60s?
60s, it's probably early 60s.
Probably early 60s, not much older than that, because he was
Yeah.
fairly young
Yeah,
when he started, but he was young enough to reach a certain
Right.
status. But I would say in his 60s, probably.
yeah. Okay. Through the end of the chapter. And while Paul was saying this in his defense, Festus said in a loud voice, Paul, you are out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you mad. But Paul said, I'm not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I utter words of sober truth. For the king knows about these matters, and I speak to him also with confidence. Since I am persuaded that none of these things escape his notice, for this has not been done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you do. And Agrippa replied to Paul, in a short time you will persuade me to become a Christian. And Paul said, I would to God that whether in a short or long time, not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for these chains. The king arose, and the governor and Bernice, and those who were sitting with them, and when they had drawn aside, they began talking to one another, saying, This man is not doing anything worthy of death or imprisonment. And Agrippa said to Festus, This man might have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. So Festus has an outburst. At this point in the message, Festus can't hold his tongue any longer. Paul, you're crazy. Your much learning is driving you mad. And so basically, he reveals his own lack of understanding about what's taking place here. We already have noted his lack of understanding based on what he tells Agrippa early on, but this just reveals the depth of his lack of understanding, because he looks at these things that Paul is saying, and it's like, Paul, what are you so worked up about? This is a fairy tale that you've told us, and in the midst of this fairy tale, you're clinging to this story that you've told us as a matter of life and death. You're not willing to give up this story to save your own life. This is ridiculous. And so Festus just doesn't have a clue of what's going on here. Doesn't understand the importance of what's been presented to him. So then Paul turns it around and says, Agrippa understands what I'm saying. He knows the prophets. He knows the things that have been written. He knows what's brought us to this point. These things were not done in a corner. These things were not done in private. Agrippa has heard the story of Jesus. He's heard the story of the prophets. He understands. And so he appeals to Agrippa, and you say, Agrippa, do you believe these things? I know that you do. And Agrippa's response has been debated through the centuries. Is his response sincere? Is it sarcastic, or is it somewhere in between? And interestingly enough, you can read different versions of the Bible and you get all three of those possibilities. So the New King James Version presents him as being very sincere. You almost persuade me to become a Christian. I mean, if you read that, that sounds as though King Agrippa is like, wow, keep talking and maybe we'll get there, Paul. The RSV, Revised Standard Versions, kind of has it in the middle. In a short time, you think to make me a Christian. He turns and puts it on Paul. In this one, in the New King James, it's Agrippa saying that I'm almost persuaded. In RSV, Agrippa is basically saying, Paul, you think you're sincere enough that you think you're about to get me there. But then look at the NIV. The NIV makes it a sarcastic response. Do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to become a Christian? You really think you're going to get that done? You think I'm going to give up this life that I have to follow what you have? I don't think so. And so it's kind of been debated that the Greek original language is kind of up for grabs. And the old thing about communication is, 10% verbal and 90% nonverbal. Mm-hmm. If we could be there to hear Agrippa's words, to see his body language, to hear the inflection in his voice, we probably would understand if he were sarcastic or sincere. But we really don't, just based on the words on the page, we really don't know.
No, and it may not even have to do with time. It may be with what he presented.
Yeah.
He may have said, you think you're going to convince me with this little bit of speech?
Yeah.
And so we don't know.
Yeah, and so however it is, whether it was sincere, sarcastic, or somewhere in between, how does Paul react? Well, Paul treats it as a sincere statement. I mean, Paul answers him sincerely.
And cut off those last.
Cut off my.
You'll have to read it.
Oh man, I'll have to find it.
It's on the very last
page.
Yeah.
Okay, so look at that. Been sabotaged by my own sidekick.
I sabotaged.
Or am I the sidekick? I never have figured that out.
I am so sorry that I cut that short.
Paul answers Agrippa with sincerity, and it said the officials converse in private, and they acknowledge Paul's innocence. At least the third time now that people in authority have acknowledged that. What are we even doing here? There's no need for this. There's no reason that we should even be in this mess in the first place, but we don't know how to get out of it. We don't know what to do to undo these things. And so Agrippa basically says he might have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. Once you have appealed to Caesar, that's it.
Yeah,
You're going to Caesar.
If they would have reversed that, they would have been making Caesar's decision.
Yeah, you can't.
And
they
couldn't make Caesar. Once the appeal had been made, they couldn't assume the role of Caesar and dismiss the case.
However, if they had exercised their authority in the first place and set him free when they recognized he was innocent, would he have needed to appeal to Caesar?
Probably not.
No. So they, early on, Festus has made the statement, I need to send him to Caesar, but I don't know what to tell Caesar. Well, if you'd let him go when you recognized he was innocent, you wouldn't be in this mess.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to make up a story to tell Caesar.
Back when you knew that you didn't have anything to accuse him of.
So it's not Paul's fault. Paul's just exercising his rights as a Roman citizen. It's their fault for not doing what they should have done in the first place, which was exercise their authority as Roman officials and cut an innocent man free when he should have.
Yeah.
So, all right, we should wrap it up next week.
So Paul
Lord
has
willing.
he has to go to Rome. Poor
He
Paul.
has to go to Rome, and it's going to be, Paul. It's never simple with Paul. It's going to be an exciting trip to
The
Rome.
next two chapters are so exciting.
Oh my goodness!
I can't wait to come back next week.
I hope they don't read ahead.
I hope they don't read those last two chapters. They'll run all the suspense.
I know.